The forest had a smell I'd learned to read like text. Wet bark meant rain within hours, pine sap meant territorial marking, and the metallic tang underneath everything meant I was closer to their lands than I should be. My hands bled as I dragged another branch toward the clearing, the rough bark tearing its skin already raw from yesterday's work. The cabin, if I could even call it that, looked like something a child might build before being called inside for dinner. Crooked walls of mismatched branches, gaps wide enough to see straight through, a roof that would collapse under the first snowfall. But it was mine. The rejection ceremony had been 3 weeks ago. 3 weeks since I'd stood in the center of the Silver Ridge pack circle, wearing the ceremonial white dress my mother had sewn with such hope, while Aaron, golden, perfect Aaron, had spoken the words that severed our bond before it could fully form. I, Aaron Denholm, future alpha of Silver Ridge, reject you, Celeste Winters, as my mate and Luna. The bond had been weak anyway, a thin thread I'd felt since my 18th birthday, easy for him to cut. The pack had watched in silence, some with pity, most with relief. A human mate for their alpha son? Unthinkable. My father had been a respected tracker, my mother a healer, but I was just ordinary. Pale blonde hair that caught the light but held no magic, gray eyes that saw too much but changed nothing, a body that shivered in the cold and bruised when touched too hard. I didn't belong among wolves who could shift their skin and howl at moons I could only admire from the ground. So I'd left, taken my father's hunting knife, my mother's medical kit, both of them gone now, casualties of a border skirmish when I was 16, and walked into the Thornwood, the neutral territory between 5 packs, where rogues and outcasts made their temporary homes before moving on or dying. Most people didn't last a month here. Something about that felt appropriate. A crack echoed through the trees. I froze, branch still in hand, every muscle locked. The forest had gone quiet, no birds, no rustle of small prey, not even wind through the leaves, the kind of silence that preceded predators. My heart hammered against my ribs as I slowly lowered the branch and reached for the knife at my belt. The blade was small, meant for gutting fish or cutting rope, but it was all I had. I scanned the tree line, looking for movement, for the telltale shift of a wolf's form between shadows. Nothing. But I could feel them, eyes on my skin like physical weight. Watching, assessing, more than one set, a pack. Please, I whispered to the empty air, to whatever gods still listened to rejected girls building hopeless shelters. Not yet. Just give me a few more days. The silence stretched. My breath came shallow and fast, fogging in the cooling evening air. October in the Thornwood meant early frost, and I still didn't have walls that would hold against wind, let alone the creatures that hunted here. Then, from directly behind me, impossible, I'd been watching that direction, a voice like gravel and smoke. That won't stand through winter. I spun, knife raised, and my breath caught. He stood at the edge of my pathetic clearing, so still he might have been carved from the mountain itself. Tall, taller than any man I'd seen, with shoulders that spoke of violence and victory in equal measure. Dark hair fell past his collar, shot through with silver that caught the dying light. But it was his eyes that stopped my heart. Amber, bright as fire, ancient as stone, fixed on me with an intensity that made me feel transparent. Alpha eyes, but not just any alpha. Behind him, emerging from the forest like shadows gaining substance, came others, 7 wolves in human form, each one radiating power that made the air thick and hard to breathe. They were dressed for work, practical clothes, worn boots, but they moved like soldiers, like killers kept on a leash. The man in front, their leader, obviously, tilted his head slightly, studying my face with an expression I couldn't read. "You're alone." It wasn't a question, but I answered anyway. Yes. Human, yes. Building a cabin with broken branches in the Thornwood. In October, alone. His voice held something that might have been curiosity, or might have been contempt. That's suicide. My fingers tightened on the knife handle. Then it's my suicide to commit. One of the wolves behind him, a woman with copper-colored hair tied back severely, made a sound that might have been approval or amusement. Another, A man with scars crossing his jaw just stared at me like I was already dead, and he was merely waiting for my body to realize it. The leader took a step forward. I took one back, stumbling slightly over the branch I'd just dropped. He noticed. Of course he noticed, but didn't advance further. Instead, he looked past me at my attempt at shelter, his gaze traveling over every inadequate inch of it. "You know what lives in these woods," he said, not a question. "Rogues, outcasts, things that hunt." I lifted my chin, trying to find courage in honesty. "Things that would kill me for sport or food or just because I'm here, and yet you're building a cabin. I don't have anywhere else to go." The words came out smaller than I'd intended, carrying the weight of 3 weeks sleeping on hard ground, eating berries and the 2 rabbits I'd managed to trap, watching the sky every night and wondering if I'd see morning. The knife trembled in my hand. I'd lost weight I couldn't afford to lose. My clothes, the dress I'd worn at my rejection, torn and stained beyond recognition, hung on me like a shroud. I was going to die here. We both knew it. The Alpha watched me for a long moment, and I watched him back, trying to understand what I was seeing in his face. Not pity. Wolves didn't pity the weak. Not hunger. Not exactly. Something else. Something that made my skin prickle with awareness beyond fear. "Ronan," the scarred man said quietly, urgently. A warning. But Ronan, the name fit him, old and strong and unyielding, raised one hand slightly, silencing his pack without looking away from me. "What's your name?" I hesitated. "Names had power," my mother used to say. "Giving your name to a predator was giving them a piece of your soul. But what did I have left to protect?" "Celeste." "Celeste," he repeated. And the way he said it, careful, like tasting something unfamiliar, made heat climb my neck. Why the Thornwood? Why not another human settlement? Because they'd ask questions, because they'd see the bond scar on my wrist where Aaron's rejection had burned itself into my skin, pale and twisted like a brand, because I couldn't bear to be around people who would look at me with pity or scorn, who would whisper about the human girl who dared to dream of being Luna. I needed to be alone, I said instead. His eyes narrowed slightly, reading the lie and the truth underneath it. Then he turned, gesturing to his pack, and my heart stuttered because I thought he was leaving. Thought they were all leaving, and the relief and terror of that warred in my chest. But instead, 2 of the wolves moved forward, carrying something between them. Timber. Real timber. Cut planks, treated and smooth, the kind you'd use for actual building. They set it down at the edge of my clearing, then returned to the forest. Came back with more, and more. I stood frozen, knife still raised uselessly, as they built a neat pile of wood beside my broken branch disaster. Good wood. Strong wood. Enough to build something that might actually survive winter. "What?" My voice cracked. "Why?" Ronan looked at me again, and this time I caught something in his expression that made my breath stop entirely. Recognition. Not of my face, but of something in me. Something he understood in a way I didn't yet. "Because watching you freeze to death in a pile of sticks would be a waste," he said. Then, quieter, almost to himself, "and because stubborn courage deserves better than a shallow grave." The copper-haired woman moved closer to him, her voice low. "Ronan, the council isn't here." His tone permitted no argument, and this is neutral territory. He turned back to me one final time. The amber eyes held mine, and I felt something shift in the air between us. Something I had no name for, but recognized all the same. Danger. Promise. The moment before lightning strikes. "Build your cabin, Celeste Winters," he said, and the fact that he knew my full name when I'd only given him half of it should have terrified me. "But know that these woods belong to the Thornwood lichens now, and nothing here is yours, unless I say it is." Then he was gone. All of them. Disappearing into the forest as silently as they'd come, leaving me alone with a pile of timber and a racing heart and the absolute certainty that my life had just changed in ways I couldn't begin to understand. I lowered the knife with shaking hands and looked at the wood, looked at my pathetic shelter, looked at the darkening forest where a lichen king had stood and watched me with eyes like fire. Then I picked up the first plank and began to build something real. The cabin took shape over the next 4 days, like something born from stubbornness and desperation in equal measure. I worked from dawn until my hands were too numb to grip the hammer, a tool I'd found wrapped in oilcloth beneath the timber pile, along with nails, a saw, and rope that smelled faintly of pine and something wilder. Wolf scent, I realized. They'd left me their own supplies. I tried not to think about what that meant. The walls rose slowly, my inexperienced hands making mistakes that cost me hours. Boards nailed crooked, measurements wrong, entire sections that had to be torn down and rebuilt. But I learned. My father had taught me to track, to read signs in disturbed earth and broken twigs. My mother had taught me to stitch wounds and brew medicines from forest plants. Neither had taught me carpentry, but I discovered I could puzzle it out through trial and failure, through splinters driven deep under my fingernails and muscles that screamed with exhaustion. By the 4th evening, I had 4 walls, a door frame, and the skeleton of a roof. It wasn't beautiful, but it was solid. Real. Mine. I was securing the last corner post when I felt them again, that peculiar silence that preceded wolves. The forest holding its breath. I didn't turn around, just kept hammering, driving the nail home with steady strikes despite the way my pulse jumped. I'd learned something over these 4 days, showing fear, invited testing. Predators respected prey that didn't run. You're learning. The same voice. Gravel and smoke. Ronan's voice. I finished hammering before I turned. He stood at the tree line again, but this time he was alone. No pack, no witnesses. Just the lichen king watching me work in the fading light, his amber eyes catching the last rays of sun like polished coins. He wore different clothes, a dark shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows, revealing forearms corded with muscle and marked with scars that told stories of violence survived. His hair was pulled back, showing the sharp lines of his face, the strong jaw, the mouth that looked like it had forgotten how to smile. He was terrifying. He was beautiful. Both truths existed simultaneously, and I didn't know what to do with either. Had to, I said, wiping sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand. The wood was too good to waste. Something flickered in his expression. Approval, maybe, or surprise. Most humans would have run, taken the timber and fled to the nearest settlement. Sold it for coin. Most humans didn't grow up with wolves. I set down the hammer, meeting his eyes despite the instinct screaming at me to lower my gaze. To submit. My father served as tracker for Silver Ridge. I know your kind values action over words, work over whining. Silver Ridge. He said the pack name like he was tasting it, analyzing it. That's where you're from. Not a question. He'd known, probably from the moment he'd seen me. Wolves could scent pack allegiance on skin, in blood, but I wasn't Silver Ridge anymore. Aaron's rejection had severed that tie. Left me packless and alone. Was. I corrected quietly. Not anymore. Ronan moved closer, each step deliberate and controlled, giving me time to react, to run if I wanted. But I held my ground, even when he stopped just a few feet away, close enough that I could see the silver threading through his dark hair. It wasn't age, but something else, something that spoke of power and transformation and things I didn't understand. He looked at the cabin, then at my hands. Without warning, he reached out and caught my wrist, turning my palm up to the dying light. His touch was warm, careful, completely at odds with the predator intensity in his eyes. My hands were destroyed, blisters on top of blisters. Some burst and weeping, others filled with fluid and painful to flex. Splinters dark under the skin. Cuts from the saw, from rough wood, from my own clumsiness. I'd wrapped them each night in strips torn from my dress, but infection was starting in 2 of the deeper wounds, red lines creeping toward my wrist, hot to the touch. "You're hurting yourself," he said, and there was something in his voice I couldn't identify. Anger, concern, both. It's my hurt to bear. I tried to pull my hand back, but his grip tightened just slightly. Not painful, but immovable. I can take care of it. With what? Hope and river water? He released me abruptly, as if my skin had burned him. You'll lose the hand if those cuts get worse. Maybe the arm. I knew he was right. I'd seen infection take limbs before, had helped my mother try to save people who'd waited too long to seek help. But acknowledging it meant acknowledging I might fail, might die here in my half-built cabin because I was too proud or too broken to ask for help. Ronan studied my face for a long moment, reading things I didn't want to show. Then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a small tin, pressing it into my palm before I could protest. "Salve," he said, "made by our healer. It'll draw out infection and speed healing." He paused, then added almost reluctantly, "Don't waste it. It's valuable." I opened the tin, and the smell hit me immediately, sharp and herbal, familiar but different from anything my mother had made. Yarrow, definitely, comfrey root. But underneath, something else. Something that made my skin tingle with awareness. "What's in it?" I asked. "Things you don't need to know about." He stepped back, putting distance between us again. "Use it twice a day. Keep the wounds clean. And for God's sake, wrap your hands before you work tomorrow." Tomorrow. The word implied he expected me to still be here, still be alive, still be building. Something warm and dangerous bloomed in my chest at the thought. "Why are you helping me?" The question came out before I could stop it. "You're a lichen king. I'm nobody. Human. Packless. I'm nothing." His expression shifted, something dark and fierce moving behind his eyes. "You're building a cabin with broken hands in hostile territory because you have nowhere else to go. That's not nothing. That's just desperation. Desperation that gives up looks different from desperation that builds." He tilted his head slightly, studying me with that unnerving intensity again. "You chose to survive. That matters." The words hit somewhere deep, in the part of me that had wondered, over these 3 weeks, if I should just walk into the forest and let whatever found me finish it quickly. If survival was even worth the effort when I had nothing and no one. When the bond scar on my wrist burned every morning as a reminder of what I'd lost, what I'd never really had. "I should go," Ronan said, though he didn't move. "My pack will be looking for me. Your pack." I turned the tin in my hands, not looking at him. "They didn't seem happy about you helping me." "They're not paid to be happy. They're paid to keep me alive and follow orders." A pause. "But you're right. They don't understand why I'm wasting resources on a human in the Thornwood." "Why are you?" The question hung between us, heavy with implications I barely understood. In the growing darkness, his amber eyes seemed to glow with their own light, fixed on me with an intensity that made breathing difficult. "I don't know yet," he said finally, and the honesty in those words was somehow more frightening than any lie would have been. Then he was gone, melting into the shadows like he'd never been there at all. I stood alone in front of my unfinished cabin, holding a tin of salve that smelled like safety and danger in equal measure, and tried to understand what was happening to my carefully planned isolation. That night, I used the salve. It burned going on, a clean burn, the kind that meant it was working. And by morning, the red lines had faded, the wounds already starting to close. I wrapped my hands in clean strips, and when I picked up the hammer again, my grip was steadier. The roof went up over the next 2 days. I worked faster now, driven by something I couldn't name. Each evening, as the light failed, I'd feel him there, watching from the trees, never approaching, just a presence at the edge of my awareness. I never turned around, never acknowledged him, but I worked harder knowing he was watching. On the 7th day, I finished the door. It was simple. Rough planks bound together with crossbeams, leather hinges I'd cut from my belt. But it closed. It locked. It meant that for the first time in 3 weeks, I could sleep behind walls with a door that shut, in a space that was mine. I stood back, looking at what I'd built, and felt something crack open in my chest. Pride, relief. The desperate, exhausted satisfaction of having created something real from nothing but stubborn will and borrowed supplies. "It's finished." I spun. Ronan stood in my clearing, not at the edge this time, but properly inside it, claiming space like he owned it, which I supposed he did. These were his woods now. Everything here belonged to him, including me. The thought should have terrified me. Instead, it sent a strange heat through my veins. "The cabin, yes," I said, forcing my voice steady. "Everything else?" I gestured vaguely at the empty interior. The lack of bed or table or anything resembling furniture. That'll take time. He moved closer, ducking slightly to enter through my new door. Inside, he seemed even larger, his presence filling the small space until I was intensely aware of every breath, every slight movement. He ran one hand along the wall, testing its strength, then looked up at the roof. "Solid work," he said. "Especially for someone who'd never built before. How did you know?" "The mistakes." He pointed to where I'd had to reinforce a corner, where nails had gone in crooked and been pulled out, leaving holes. "But you learned from them. Each wall is better than the last." I didn't know what to say to that, so I said nothing. We stood in silence, the air between us charged with something I had no name for. Outside, full darkness had fallen. Inside, with no fire yet built, no lamp yet lit, the shadows were thick enough to hide in. "Celeste." My name in his mouth again, careful and weighted. "You can't stay here." The words hit like a physical blow. "What?" "Winter's coming. In a month, maybe less, the thornwood will be buried in snow. Temperatures that'll freeze your blood, game that migrates south, water sources that ice over." He turned to face me fully, and his expression was grim. "This cabin is good, but it's not enough. You'll die here. Then I'll die here." The words came out fierce, defensive. "It's better than going back. Back to Silver Ridge? Back to anywhere." I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold despite the still air. "You don't understand. There's nothing for me out there. No pack, no family. No place that wants a rejected human who couldn't even keep a weak bond from being severed. This," I gestured at the cabin. "This is all I have, and it's mine." Ronan was quiet for a long moment. Then, so quietly I almost missed it. "I understand better than you think." Something in his voice made me look up. Really look at him. In the darkness, I could just make out his face, the hard lines, the amber eyes that never quite stopped glowing, the mouth pressed into a tight line. And for the first time, I saw past the power and the danger to something else, loneliness. The same loneliness I carried, the kind that came from being separate. Other, alone even in crowds. He was a king, surrounded by pack, and somehow I knew he was just as isolated as I was in my cabin of borrowed wood. Stay the winter with my pack. The offer hung in the air between us, impossible and tempting in equal measure. What? "The Thornwood lichens have a compound a mile north. We have space, food, heat. You'd be safe." He paused, then added, "And you'd be useful. Our healer could use an assistant who knows human medicine. Your mother was a healer, wasn't she? How do you know that?" "I make it my business to know everything in my territory. Not an apology, just fact." "So, will you come?" Every instinct screamed at me to refuse, to cling to my independence, my isolation, my hard-won cabin. But another part, the part that remembered my mother's practical wisdom, that understood survival sometimes meant accepting help, whispered different advice. "And in spring?" I asked. "When winter ends, then you come back here, to your cabin, if that's what you want." His eyes held mine. "I'm not offering a cage, Celeste. I'm offering a chance to survive." I looked around my cabin, my beautiful, fragile, inadequate cabin that I'd built with bleeding hands and desperate hope. Looked at the walls that wouldn't hold against killing cold, the roof that might collapse under heavy snow, the empty interior that offered shelter but not safety. Then I looked at Ronan, at the lichen king who'd brought me timber and salve, and was now offering me winter among wolves. "One condition," I heard myself say. His eyebrow rose slightly. "You're bargaining with me?" "Yes." I lifted my chin. "In spring I come back here. You don't stop me, don't try to keep me. This place stays mine." For a moment I thought he'd refuse, thought I'd overstepped in some fatal way. Then his mouth curved, not quite a smile, but close, and something in my chest tightened at the sight. "Agreed," he said. "The cabin remains yours." He extended his hand, and I took it, his palm warm and rough against mine. The moment our skin touched, something electric ran up my arm, made my breath catch. His grip tightened just slightly, and I saw his pupils dilate, knew he'd felt it too. Whatever this was between us, this strange, impossible pull, it was mutual, and that was more terrifying than anything else that had happened in these woods. The Thornwood lichen compound was nothing like I'd expected. I'd imagined something crude, rough shelters, territorial markers, the barely civilized existence of wolves who lived more in fur than skin. Instead, Ronan led me through the forest to a clearing where buildings stood in organized clusters, smoke rising from chimneys, lights glowing in windows. It looked almost like a village, except for the way the structures were positioned. Strategic sightlines, defensive positions, everything built with warfare in mind. "We've been here 5 years," Ronan said, following my gaze. "Built it ourselves after the territory wars ended." Territory wars. The phrase was casual, but I heard the weight underneath. Battles over land, over power, over the right to exist. Things that had happened while I was safe in Silver Ridge, pretending the world beyond pack borders didn't concern me. The compound was busy despite the late hour. Wolves moved between buildings, some in human form, some transitioning, the air shimmering around them as bone and muscle reformed. I tried not to stare, but it was impossible. I'd grown up around shifters, but Silver Ridge wolves were careful about transforming in front of humans, treating it as something private and sacred. Here, it was casual as breathing. "They're not going to like me," I said quietly. "No," Ronan agreed, and I appreciated the honesty, "but they'll respect my decision." That's enough. We passed a training ground where 2 wolves sparred in human form, their movements too fast to follow, strength that would shatter human bones channeled into strikes that their opponents somehow absorbed and countered. Near the main hall, a group gathered around a fire, talking in low voices that cut off when they saw me approaching, really, the human with their king. I felt their eyes like brands, assessing, measuring, finding me wanting. My clothes were filthy and torn, my hair tangled, my hands still wrapped in makeshift bandages. I looked like exactly what I was. Desperate, packless, dependent on charity I had no way to repay. The copper-haired woman from before detached from the group, moving to intercept us. Up close, she was even more striking. Tall and lean, with eyes the color of spring moss, and a face that was all sharp angles and barely contained skepticism. "Ronan." She didn't even glance at me. "We need to talk." "Later, Sienna." His voice held an edge I hadn't heard before. "Right now, I'm getting our guest settled." "Guest." The word dripped with disbelief. "Is that what we're calling strays now?" My face heated, but I kept my expression neutral. I'd endured worse than skepticism from wolves who thought humans beneath their notice. "Sienna." Ronan's voice went deadly quiet. "You have a problem with my decisions?" The challenge hung in the air. Around us, the conversation at the fire stopped completely. Everyone was watching now, waiting to see if Sienna would push, would question his authority in front of the pack. She held his gaze for a long moment. Something passing between them I couldn't read. Then she lowered her eyes fractionally. Not submission, but acknowledgement. "No problem. Just concerns about security, about resources, about bringing an outsider into pack territory during uncertain times." "Your concerns are noted." Ronan's tone suggested the conversation was over. "Now show Celeste to the healer's quarters. Elle will want to meet her assistant." Sienna's eyes finally cut to me, and I saw the calculation there. Not just dismissal, actual assessment, like she was trying to understand what her king saw in a bedraggled human that warranted this attention. "This way," she said curtly, then strode toward one of the smaller buildings without checking if I followed. Ronan touched my elbow briefly, just a brush of contact, but it sent awareness skittering across my skin. "Elle is good people. She'll take care of you." Then he was gone, moving toward the main hall where several wolves waited, leaving me to follow Sienna through the compound alone. She walked fast, clearly hoping I'd struggle to keep up. But I'd spent weeks hiking through the thornwood, had learned to move quietly through underbrush, to step where footing was solid. I matched her pace easily, and after a moment I saw her shoulders tighten with what might have been grudging respect. "Rules," she said without looking back. "Don't go into the forest alone. Don't enter the main hall without invitation. Don't interrupt training. Don't touch weapons that aren't yours. Don't discuss pack business with outsiders. which means anyone not standing in this compound right now. Understood. And stay away from Ronan. I nearly stumbled. Excuse me? Sienna stopped so abruptly I almost ran into her. She turned, and her eyes were hard. I've known Ronan for 8 years, fought beside him, bled with him, helped him build this pack from nothing. He's the best leader I've ever served, and I won't watch some human with a sad story manipulate him. I'm not, I started, but she cut me off. You don't know what you are yet, but I'll be watching. One wrong move, one hint that you're using his protection for something other than survival, and I'll make sure you regret it. She leaned closer. Lycan King or not, he's still a man. And men make stupid decisions when they think they're rescuing something. The word stung because part of me wondered if she was right. Was that what this was? Ronan seeing a broken thing and deciding to fix it? The thought made something twist in my chest. Shame and anger and disappointment I had no right to feel. I didn't ask for his help, I said quietly. I was fine on my own. You were dying on your own. Sienna's voice was flat, factual. But that doesn't make you special. It just makes you another problem we have to manage. She turned and continued walking. I followed in silence, swallowing words that would only make things worse. The healer's quarters were in a long, low building near the edge of the compound. Inside, it smelled like the salve Ronan had given me, herbs and something wilder, cleaner than human medicine, but serving the same purpose. The main room was divided into sections: examination area, storage for supplies, a workspace covered in mortars and pestles, and drying herbs hanging from the ceiling. And sitting at that workspace, grinding something in a stone bowl, was a woman who looked up as we entered and immediately smiled. Finally. I've been waiting for you. Elle was small, barely over 5 feet, with dark skin and silver-shot black hair, braided in intricate patterns down her back. Her eyes were warm brown, completely different from the predator gold of most wolves I'd met. When she stood, I saw she moved with a slight limp, favoring her left leg. This is Celeste, Sienna said. The human Ronan insisted on bringing in. The human with excellent hands and a healer's training, Elle corrected, moving closer to peer at me with open curiosity. Let me see. She took my wrapped hands gently, unwinding the bandages with practiced efficiency. When she saw the wounds, already healing better than they should be, thanks to the salve, she made a satisfied sound. You used it properly. Cleaned first, applied thin, let it soak in. She looked up at me. Your mother taught you well. The mention of my mother made my throat tight. She tried. And succeeded, I'd say. Ella released my hands and gestured to a chair. Sit. Tell me what you know about field medicine while I make something for those splinters still working their way out. I sat. And over the next hour, Elle asked questions about stitching wounds, setting bones, brewing fever remedies, identifying poisonous plants from safe ones. I answered as best I could, drawing on memories of watching my mother work, of the few times she'd let me assist with pack injuries. Sienna stayed the entire time, leaning against the wall, watching me with those sharp green eyes, looking for cracks, for lies, for any reason to validate her distrust. I tried to ignore her and focus on Ellie, who was easy to talk to in a way I hadn't experienced since my mother died. She listened carefully, nodding at some answers, gently correcting others, teaching without making me feel stupid. You'll do fine, Ella said finally, applying a new salve to my hands. Different from Ronan's, lighter and cooling. I could use help, especially with inventory. My leg makes long days difficult, and we're heading into the season where injuries spike, hunting accidents, training mishaps, the occasional territorial dispute that gets physical. I can do inventory, I said. Organization, preparation, whatever you need, Ella smiled. Good. We'll start tomorrow. For tonight, you need food and sleep. You look half-starved. As if summoned by her words, my stomach growled audibly. I couldn't remember the last real meal I'd eaten. The rabbits had been days ago, and I'd been rationing the berries, making them last. I'll show her to the dining hall, Sienna said, pushing off the wall. Still watching me. Still waiting for me to fail. The dining hall was crowded, 30 or 40 wolves gathered at long tables, eating and talking and living in a way that made my chest ache with memory of what I'd lost. Once, I'd imagined this would be my life. Dinner with Aaron's pack, taking my place at his side, belonging somewhere. Instead, I was an outsider again, following Sienna to a table in the back where a few wolves sat in relative quiet. "Celeste, meet your roommates," Sienna said, with something that might have been amusement. "Tessa, Flynn, and Garrett. They'll show you where you're sleeping." Tessa was young, maybe 19, with blonde hair darker than mine and a bright, curious expression. Flynn was older, somewhere in his 30s, with the kind of weathered face that came from years outdoors. Garrett looked to be in his mid-20s, built like a mountain, and watching me with the same wariness I'd seen in most of the pack. "Hi," Tessa said immediately, patting the bench beside her. "Come sit. Are you really human? Ronan said you built a whole cabin by yourself. That's amazing. Where did you learn? What's it like being human? Can you really not smell anything?" "Tessa," Flynn said mildly. "Let her breathe." But I found myself smiling, the first real smile in weeks. "I'm human, yes. The cabin took a week, and I can smell fine, just not like you can." Food appeared. Someone had prepared a plate, and it was placed in front of me before I could ask. Roasted meat, root vegetables, bread still warm from the oven. My eyes actually stung at the sight. "Eat," Garrett said gruffly. "You look like you need it." I did. I ate until my stomach hurt, until the hollow feeling that had been my constant companion finally eased. Around me, my table mates talked. Casual pack gossip, discussion of tomorrow's tasks, gentle questions that felt more like welcome than interrogation. And across the hall, at the head table, Ronan sat with his senior pack members. He wasn't eating, just listening to a man beside him speak urgently about something. But his eyes found mine once, held for a moment, then released. I felt that look all the way to my bones. After dinner, Tessa showed me to the sleeping quarters, a long building divided into small rooms, each furnished simply with a bed, a chest, a washstand. Mine was at the end, near a window that looked out over the forest. "It's not much," Tessa said apologetically, "but the blankets are warm, and you can decorate however you want. Some people hang herbs or drawings or—" "It's perfect," I interrupted, because it was. 4 walls, a real bed, safety, everything I'd been trying to build in the forest, handed to me on the condition that I stay through winter. That night, I lay in an actual bed for the first time in 3 weeks, and stared at the ceiling. Outside, I could hear wolves moving through the compound. Patrols changing, late conversations, the distant sound of someone singing. Inside, I could hear my own heartbeat, too fast, too aware. I thought about Sienna's warning, about Elle's kindness, about Ronan's eyes across the dining hall. And I wondered what I'd actually agreed to when I'd taken his hand and accepted survival over solitude. The bond scar on my wrist throbbed once, phantom pain from a tie that no longer existed, and I pressed my palm over it, willing it to be quiet. That life was over. Whatever came next would be different. It had to be. The days fell into a rhythm I hadn't expected. Steady, purposeful, almost peaceful. I woke with the dawn, helped Elle in the healer's quarters, learned the 100 small ways wolf physiology differed from human. Their injuries healed faster, yes, but they also ran hotter, needed different herb ratios, reacted badly to treatments that would help humans. "Iron," Elle explained one morning, showing me a locked cabinet. "Even in trace amounts, it burns them. Silver is worse, obviously, but most people know that. Iron is sneaky. Hides in some plants, some minerals. You have to be careful." I cataloged everything, organized supplies, prepared poultices and tinctures under Elle's watchful eye. My hands healed completely within a week, the skin smooth where blisters had been, as if I'd never spent days tearing them apart on rough timber. The pack remained distant, but not hostile. They watched me, always watching, but with more curiosity than threat as the days passed. Tessa became something like a friend, her enthusiasm infectious as she explained pack dynamics and wolf politics with the breathless excitement of someone who still found it all magical. Ronan took over 5 years ago, she told me one evening as we organized medicinal stores. Before that, the Thornwood was chaos. Rogues, outcasts, constant fighting. He came in and just unified everything, made rules that everyone could live with, built the compound, gave people purpose. Where was he before? I asked, trying to sound casual. Tessa's expression shifted, still friendly, but guarded. That's his story to tell, but he came from somewhere south. Somewhere that hurt him enough that he left and never went back. I thought about that while I worked, about the loneliness I'd seen in his eyes, the recognition. We were both running from something, both trying to build new lives from the ruins of old ones. I saw him occasionally, across the compound, in the training yard, once in the healer's quarters when one of his wolves had taken a bad fall. He'd stayed while Elle examined the injury, his presence filling the small space, and I'd felt his eyes on me while I prepared the supplies she needed. "You're settling in well," he'd said as he was leaving. "Elle is a good teacher." That's not what I meant. I'd looked up then, found him watching me with that intense focus that made breathing difficult. Then what did you mean? You're not just surviving anymore, you're living. A pause. It suits you. Then he'd left, and I'd stood there with a mortar and pestle in my hands, trying to understand why those simple words had made my chest feel too tight. 2 weeks into my stay, everything changed. It started with a commotion near the compound entrance, raised voices, the sound of multiple wolves shifting at once, that electric charge in the air that preceded violence. I was in the healer's quarters organizing dried herbs when Tessa burst through the door, her face pale. "Visitors," she said breathlessly. "From Silver Ridge." My heart stopped. "What?" "3 of them. They're demanding to speak with Ronan. About you." Elle's hand landed on my shoulder, steadying. "Stay here. Let Ronan handle this." But I couldn't. Whatever was happening, it was because of me. I moved to the door, ignoring Elle's protest, and stepped outside into chaos barely contained. The compound's main area had cleared. Wolves lined the perimeter, forming a loose circle around 3 visitors who stood near the entrance. I recognized them immediately. Marcus, Aaron's second. Jennifer, one of the pack's senior females. And Aaron himself, golden and perfect, and looking at the Thornwood compound like it was something distasteful he'd stepped in. Ronan stood facing them, Sienna and 4 other wolves flanking him. The air between the 2 groups practically vibrated with tension. "I know authority here," Ronan was saying, his voice carrying clearly across the space. "The Thornwood is neutral territory. What happens within these borders is my concern, not yours. She's Silver Ridge born," Marcus argued. "That gives us claim. She's packless." Ronan's tone was flat, factual. "Your future alpha rejected her, publicly. That severed all ties." My legs felt weak. I gripped the doorframe, trying to stay upright while the world tilted around me. They'd come for me. After 3 weeks, they'd finally noticed I hadn't shown up dead somewhere, and had come to finish what Aaron's rejection had started. "There are complications." Aaron spoke for the first time, and his voice was exactly as I remembered. Smooth, confident, the voice of someone who'd never been told no. "The rejection may not have been properly completed." Ronan went very, very still. "Explain." "The bond was weak, yes. But Celeste left before the final severing ritual could be performed. Technically, she's still tied to Silver Ridge, still under pack law and protection." Protection. The word was laughable. They'd offered no protection when I'd stood in that circle wearing white, while Aaron spoke words that had burned like acid in my veins. They'd offered no protection when I'd packed my few possessions and walked into the forest alone. Protection was just another word for control, for ownership, for the right to dictate my life because I'd been born on their land. No. The word came out before I'd realized I was moving, walking across the compound toward the gathered wolves. Everyone turned to look at me, Silver Ridge visitors with varying expressions of surprise and calculation. Thornwood wolves with concern and curiosity, and Ronan with something I couldn't quite read. Celeste, Aaron started, but I cut him off. No, I repeated louder this time. My voice shook but held. I'm not going back. I don't care about technicalities or rituals or pack law. You rejected me. You severed the bond. I left. That's the end of it. Aaron's expression softened into something that might have looked like sympathy to someone who didn't know him. I understand you're hurt, but you can't survive out here alone. Come back to Silver Ridge. We'll find you a place, a role. You'll be safe. Safe as what? The human charity case you all pity? My hands clenched at my sides. I'd rather die in the thornwood than live like that. That can be arranged, Jennifer said coldly. You're making demands you have no standing to make, girl. You're packless, mateless, powerless. If we say you return, you return. No. This time it was Ronan who spoke, stepping forward to position himself slightly in front of me. The movement was subtle but unmistakable. Protection, claiming space between me and threat. She stays, as my guest, under my protection, for as long as she chooses. The air went electric. Marcus's eyes widened fractionally. Jennifer's mouth thinned into a hard line. And Aaron looked between Ronan and me with dawning understanding and something that might have been jealousy. You're protecting her, Aaron said slowly. Why? What is she to you? That's not your concern. It is if you're starting something that could affect pack relations. Marcus stepped forward, his posture aggressive. The Thornwood is neutral territory, yes. But neutrality means not taking sides. Not providing sanctuary to those who run from their obligations. She has no obligations to you. Ronan's voice dropped lower, more dangerous. The rejection was witnessed and accepted. You can't reclaim her just because you've decided she might be useful after all. The accusation hung in the air. I saw it land. Saw the way Marcus and Jennifer exchanged glances, and suddenly I understood. This wasn't about bond technicalities or pack law. This was about something else. What changed? I asked, looking directly at Aaron. 3 weeks ago, I wasn't worth keeping. What's different now? He had the grace to look uncomfortable. There have been developments, political situations that make having a human connection valuable. Your father's reputation as a tracker. My father is dead. The words came out sharp as broken glass. You didn't care about his reputation when you rejected his daughter. You didn't care about any of it until it became convenient. Celeste, please. She said no. Ronan's voice cut through Aaron's plea like a blade. And in the Thornwood, no means no. Now leave. Before I decide your presence here is a territorial violation. The threat was clear. Marcus bristled, his wolf rising close to the surface. I could see it in the way his eyes flashed gold, the way his shoulders shifted. Jennifer put a hand on his arm, warning, but her own expression was murderous. This isn't over, she said. The council will hear about this. About you harboring a packless human, about interfering in Silver Ridge affairs. Let them hear. Ronan's stance didn't shift, didn't waver. I'm not afraid of your counsel. Aaron looked at me one last time, and I saw something complex in his expression. Regret, maybe, or calculation about opportunities lost. If you change your mind, I won't. They left then, 3 wolves disappearing into the forest with the kind of wounded pride that promised future trouble. The compound stayed silent until they were well out of sight, then erupted into low conversations, wolves clustering in groups to discuss what had just happened. I stood frozen, my heart hammering against my ribs, trying to process what had occurred. They'd come for me. Aaron had come for me, not because he wanted me, but because I'd suddenly become useful, a pawn in whatever political game Silver Ridge was playing. And Ronan had sent them away, Celeste. His hand touched my elbow, gentle despite the residual violence still humming through his frame. Come with me. I let him guide me away from the gathering crowd, away from the stares and whispers, into the forest path that led to the training grounds. We walked in silence until the compound sounds faded, until we were alone among the trees with the late afternoon sun filtering through the canopy. You didn't have to do that, I said finally. Yes, I did. They'll cause problems. For you, for the pack. Jennifer was right. The council... I don't care about the council. He turned to face me, and his expression was fierce. You said no. That's the only thing that matters. But why? Why protect me like this? Sienna was right. I'm nobody. Just another problem you have to manage. I wrapped my arms around myself, suddenly cold despite the mild temperature. What am I to you? The question I'd been avoiding, the one that had haunted me for 2 weeks while I settled into pack life, and felt his eyes on me across distances, tracking my movements through the compound, like I was something precious and dangerous in equal measure. Ronan was quiet for a long moment, his amber eyes searching my face. Then, so quietly I almost missed it. I don't know yet, but you're not nobody. I'm human, packless. I have nothing to offer you or your pack. You have yourself. He took a step closer. Your stubborn courage. Your refusal to break even when breaking would be easier. The way you chose to build rather than surrender. That's not nothing, Celeste. That's everything. The words landed in my chest like stones dropped in still water, ripples spreading outward through parts of me I thought were numb. I looked up at him. Really looked, past the power and the danger to the man underneath, and saw the truth he wasn't quite saying. He understood. Not just my situation, but me. The specific flavor of my loneliness, my determination to prove I could survive alone, my need to build something that was mine. He understood because he'd felt it too, was still feeling it, despite being surrounded by pack, despite having power and respect and everything I'd lost. What happened to you? I asked. Before you came here? His expression shuddered slightly, but he didn't look away. Something that taught me the difference between being wanted and being needed. Between being valued for who you are and being valued for what you can provide. And which am I? Neither. His hand came up, cupping my cheek with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with the predator strength I knew he possessed. You're the woman who chose to survive when survival was nearly impossible, who built a cabin with broken hands and didn't ask for help until help was offered, who just faced down her former pack and said no when saying yes would have been easier. His thumb brushed across my cheekbone, and I felt that touch everywhere, warmth spreading through my chest and down my spine. The bond scar on my wrist pulsed once. Not pain this time, but awareness. Recognition of something new forming where something old had been severed. Ronan, I know it's too soon. I know you're still healing from the rejection, still learning to stand on your own. His eyes held mine, intense and honest. But I need you to know, you're not a problem to manage. You're not charity. You're... He stopped, and I saw him struggle with words, with how to express something that maybe didn't have language yet. You're important, he finished finally. To me, for reasons I'm still figuring out, but that's the truth. The forest was quiet around us, afternoon light turning gold as it fell through the leaves. Somewhere in the distance, I could hear the compound coming back to life. Training resuming, conversations continuing, life moving forward. But here, in this moment, there was just the two of us, and the thing building between us that I still didn't have a name for. I'm scared, I admitted quietly. Of me? Of this. Whatever this is. I gestured between us. I've already been rejected once, already had someone decide I wasn't worth keeping. I don't know if I can survive that again. Then I'll make you a promise. Ronan's hand slid from my cheek to the back of my neck, his touch warm and grounding. I won't claim you until you're ready, won't push or pressure or expect anything you're not willing to give. You want to go back to your cabin in spring? I'll let you go. You want to stay? You can stay. But either way, you're not nothing to me. And I won't let anyone, not Aaron, not Silver Ridge, not anyone, make you believe you are. The words cracked something open in my chest, something that had been sealed shut since that rejection ceremony, since I'd stood in white while Aaron severed our weak bond and ended the future I'd imagined. Tears burned behind my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Not yet. Okay, I whispered. Okay. I'll stay through winter, and we'll figure out the rest as we go. His smile was small but genuine, transforming his face from merely handsome to something that made my breath catch. That's all I'm asking. We walked back to the compound together, not touching, but close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his skin, could sense his presence like a shield at my side. When we emerged from the forest path, conversation stopped, wolves turning to watch us with open curiosity. Sienna stood near the main hall, arms crossed, expression unreadable. When our eyes met, I saw the warning there, still watching, still waiting for me to prove myself worthy or unworthy of the protection Ronan had offered. I lifted my chin and met her gaze steadily. I didn't know if I was worthy, didn't know if I'd survive whatever was coming, because the look on Jennifer's face promised this wasn't over, promised that Silver Ridge would find ways to make their displeasure known. But I knew one thing. I wasn't running anymore. I'd built a cabin with broken hands. I'd faced down my former pack and said no. And whatever came next, I'd face it standing, with my spine straight and my chin up, and the knowledge that I was more than the rejection that had defined me. Elle caught my eye from across the compound and smiled, giving me a subtle nod of approval. Tessa bounded over, questions already bubbling from her lips about what had happened, whether I was okay, whether Silver Ridge would really cause trouble. And Ronan stood beside me, solid and steady, his presence a promise that I didn't have to face any of it alone. For the first time in 3 weeks, maybe longer, I felt something that might have been hope. Winter came to the Thornwood like a predator. Silent at first, then all at once. The first snow fell 3 weeks after Silver Ridge's visit, transforming the compound into something from a dream. I stood at my window that morning, watching fat flakes drift down through gray light, and thought about my cabin, about how those walls I'd built would look buried under white, how the roof might sag under the weight, how lonely it would feel with no fire inside to warm it, but I was here. Safe. Warm. Alive. The work with Elle intensified as temperatures dropped. Wolves pushed themselves harder in training, which meant more injuries. Torn muscles, fractured bones that healed quickly but still needed setting, deep bruises that required the salves I'd learned to make myself now, mixing herbs with confidence born from repetition. "You have good instincts," Elle told me one afternoon while we treated a young wolf who'd dislocated his shoulder. "Your mother taught you technique, but instinct is something you're born with. You feel what's needed before I ask for it." The compliment warmed me more than I wanted to admit. I'd spent so long being told I wasn't enough. Not wolf enough for Aaron, not strong enough to survive alone. That being good at something, being useful, felt like rediscovering a part of myself I'd forgotten existed. The pack's attitude toward me had shifted subtly over the weeks. Not acceptance, exactly, but something closer to tolerance. They watched me less, spoke more freely when I was present, occasionally included me in conversations that weren't directly about my work. Tessa had become a true friend, dragging me to meals and training sessions, teaching me the pack's songs and stories with infectious enthusiasm. Flynn treated me like a younger sister he was obligated to protect, while Garrett remained gruffly distant, but not unkind. Even Sienna had thawed fractionally. She no longer watched me like I was about to betray them all, though she still kept careful distance between us. And Ronan? Ronan was everywhere and nowhere. I'd catch glimpses of him, in the training yard demonstrating a combat technique, in the main hall listening to disputes between pack members, walking the perimeter at night, checking defenses. Sometimes our eyes would meet across distance, and I'd feel that pull again, that awareness that made my skin warm and my heart race, but he kept his promise. No pressure, no expectations. He treated me with the same courtesy he showed all pack members, maybe slightly more attention, but nothing that would draw comment or make me uncomfortable. It should have been a relief. Instead, I found myself wanting more, seeking him out with my eyes, listening for his voice in crowded rooms, feeling absurdly pleased when he stopped by the healer's quarters on some thin excuse to check supplies or ask Ella's opinion on something that clearly didn't require her expertise. "You're staring," Ella said one evening, not looking up from the poultice she was preparing. I jerked my attention back to the bandages I was rolling. "I wasn't—" "You were." At the doorway where he was standing 30 seconds ago. Now she did look up, and her expression was knowing and kind. "It's all right to want things, Celeste, even things that scare you. I don't know what I want. Don't you?" I thought about Ronan's hand on my cheek in the forest, about the way he'd stood between me and Silver Ridge without hesitation, about the loneliness I'd seen in his eyes that matched my own, about promises kept and distance maintained and the slow, steady building of something I still didn't have a name for. I want to stop being afraid, I admitted quietly. Afraid that wanting something means it'll be taken away, that caring about someone gives them power to hurt me. That's not fear. That's wisdom. Elle set down her work, giving me her full attention. Aaron hurt you. Rejection leaves scars that don't show on skin. But not everyone is Aaron. Some people mean what they say. Keep what they promise. How do I know which kind Ronan is? You watch. You wait. You let time prove what words claim. She smiled. And from what I've seen, he's already proving it. Every day he doesn't push, doesn't demand, doesn't treat you like something he owns. That's proof. Not everyone has that patience. That night, I couldn't sleep. The wind howled outside, driving snow against the windows. And somewhere in the compound, wolves moved through the storm on patrol. I lay in my bed thinking about Elle's words, about proof and patience, about the difference between being wanted and being needed. A sound brought me fully awake. Voices raised, running footsteps, the sharp bark of commands. I threw on clothes and rushed outside into chaos. The compound was alive with movement. Wolves running toward the forest edge, others emerging from buildings half-dressed, weapons being distributed. In the center of it all stood Ronan, Sienna beside him, both looking grim. What's happening? I caught Tessa's arm as she ran past. Border breach, north side. Her face was pale. Rogues, maybe. Or worse. Worse? But she was already gone, shifting mid-stride, her clothes tearing as fur replaced skin, and she bounded toward the forest on 4 legs. Around me, more wolves were transforming, the air shimmering with power and change. I ran to the main hall where Ronan stood coordinating the response. He saw me approaching and his expression tightened. "Get to the healer's quarters," he ordered. "Stay there until someone comes for you. What's happening?" "Nothing you need to worry about. Go. Now." But I saw his face, saw the tension in every line of his body, and knew he was lying. This was something to worry about, something serious enough that every fighter in the compound was mobilizing. Elle was already in the healer's quarters when I arrived, preparing supplies with practiced efficiency. Bandages, needles, and thread, bottles of salve and tincture lined up with military precision. "Help me set up the examination tables," she said without preamble. "If they're mobilizing everyone, we'll have wounded coming back." We worked in tense silence, preparing for casualties we both hoped wouldn't come. Outside, the storm raged on, snow falling so thick I couldn't see more than a few feet beyond the windows. The first wolf came back an hour later, Flynn, bleeding from a deep gash across his ribs, his breathing labored. Behind him came others, Garrett with a mangled hand, a young female I didn't know well with something that looked like claw marks across her back, 3 more with various injuries that Ella and I treated as quickly as our hands could move. "What attacked you?" Elle asked while stitching Flynn's wound. "Not what. Who?" His voice was strained. "Silver Ridge wolves, at least a dozen. They came across the border like they owned it, challenged our patrol." My blood went cold. Silver Ridge? They claimed they were pursuing a rogue. Garrett's voice was tight with pain as I cleaned and bandaged his hand. But they crossed way too far into our territory for that to be true. This was a message. A message. About me. Because I'd said no. Because Ronan had protected me. Because Silver Ridge didn't take rejection well when it came from humans who were supposed to know their place. More wounded came. Thankfully none critical, but enough that Elle and I worked non-stop for hours, cleaning wounds, stitching cuts, setting a broken arm, administering pain relief and antibiotics. My hands moved with steady precision despite the fear churning in my gut, despite the knowledge that this was my fault. Dawn was breaking when Ronan finally returned. He was covered in blood, some his, some not, with a gash across his forehead and his clothes torn. But he was walking, breathing, alive. Our eyes met across the healer's quarters, and something passed between us that needed no words. "Everyone accounted for?" Ella asked. All back. No losses. His voice was rough with exhaustion. Silver Ridge retreated when we called in reinforcements, but they made their point. Which was? I forced the question past the tightness in my throat. That they don't accept neutral territory protecting their interests, that having you here is seen as an act of aggression. He moved closer, and I saw the fury banked in his eyes. Not at me, but for me. They want you to know that staying here puts everyone at risk. The words landed like blows. I'd known on some level that my presence complicated things, but knowing abstractly was different from seeing wolves I'd come to care about bleeding because of me, because I'd been too stubborn or too scared to just go back to Silver Ridge and accept whatever limited existence they'd offer. I should leave, I said quietly. No. Ronan's response was immediate and absolute. People were hurt because of me. People were hurt because Silver Ridge violated our borders and attacked our patrol. That's on them. Not you. He caught my wrist, careful to avoid the bond scar, and made me look at him. You don't get to sacrifice yourself because they're trying to manipulate you through guilt. That's not how this works. Then how does it work? Tears burned behind my eyes. How do I live here knowing that every day I stay might mean another attack, more injuries, maybe worse? You live here by trusting that we chose this, that I chose this. His grip tightened slightly. Every wolf in this pack knows why Silver Ridge attacked, and not one of them has suggested we give you up. Not even Sienna. I looked past him and found Sienna standing in the doorway, her armor dented and blood-stained. When our eyes met, she didn't smile, but she nodded once. Acknowledgement, maybe respect. We protect our own, she said simply. You're here under Ronan's protection. That makes you ours. The words broke something in me. I'd been so afraid of being a burden, of taking without giving, of being the weak human who needed saving. But they weren't looking at me with resentment or regret. They were looking at me with acceptance. Let me help then, I said, turning back to Ronan. I can't fight, but I can do this. I gestured at the healer's quarters, at the supplies and the wounded, and the work I'd been doing alongside Elle. Let me be useful. Let me earn my place here. You already have. But he smiled slightly. Though Elle would probably love the help permanently. She would, Elle confirmed from across the room. Girls got better hands than I do now and twice the energy. Over the following weeks, that became my purpose. I worked with Elle from dawn to dusk, treating injuries, managing inventory, even teaching some of the younger wolves basic first aid, since they'd never needed it before. Their healing was so fast that small injuries barely registered, but knowing how to treat humans, how to handle injuries that didn't immediately close, that became valuable knowledge in a pack that might encounter human threats. Silver Ridge didn't attack again, but their presence was felt. Increased patrols near our borders. Occasional sightings of their wolves watching from just outside Thornwood territory. The constant awareness that they were waiting for an excuse, a mistake, a moment of weakness. But winter deepened, and the compound became a world unto itself. Snow piled high against buildings, and the pack drew closer together. Shared meals became longer and louder. Training sessions included everyone, even me, in modified ways that didn't require shifting. Tessa taught me to throw knives with surprising accuracy. Flynn showed me how to track even through snow. Garrett, in his gruff way, made sure I knew the compound's emergency procedures and escape routes. And Ronan was there. Not hovering, not possessive, but present in a way that made me feel anchored. Safe, seen. One night, 6 weeks into winter, he found me on the healer's quarters porch, watching snow fall under moonlight. Can't sleep? He asked, coming to stand beside me. Too much in my head. I didn't look at him. Just watched the way moonlight made the snow glow blue-white. I keep thinking about my cabin. Whether it survived the storms, whether there'll be anything left come spring. We can check on it when the weather clears. Make repairs if needed. You'd do that? I said it stays yours. I meant it. He was quiet for a moment then. Do you still want to go back when spring comes? The question I'd been asking myself for weeks now. The cabin had been my symbol of independence, of survival, of building something that was mine alone. But standing here in the compound, surrounded by wolves who'd accepted me, working beside Elle, laughing with Tessa, feeling Ronan's presence like a steady heartbeat beside my own. This felt like something too. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me still needs to know I can survive alone. But another part likes belonging somewhere. I looked at him then, found him watching me with an expression that was open and hopeful and vulnerable in a way I'd never seen before. The Lichen King, stripped of pretense, just a man asking a question that mattered. Likes belonging with you, I corrected quietly. The air between us shifted, charged. His hand came up slowly, giving me time to move away, but I didn't. His palm cupped my cheek like it had in the forest, warm despite the cold, and his thumb traced the line of my jaw with infinite gentleness. Celeste, he said, and my name in his mouth was a prayer and a promise. I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to answer honestly. Can you do that? I nodded, not trusting my voice. Are you staying because you want to, or because you feel like you owe me? Because if it's obligation, if it's gratitude, I don't want that. I want... He stopped, took a breath. I want you to choose this. Choose me. Not because I protected you or gave you shelter, but because you want to be here. My heart hammered against my ribs. The bond scar on my wrist, that mark of rejection and pain, pulsed once, then went quiet. As if even that old wound recognized something new was forming, something real. I was terrified of wanting anything after Aaron, I said carefully. Terrified that caring would give someone power to hurt me again, but you've had that power for weeks now, Ronan. You've had it since the moment you left me timber instead of leaving me to freeze. And you haven't used it. Haven't demanded or expected or pushed. You've just been patient, kind, present. I turned into his touch, letting myself lean into the warmth of his palm. So yes, I choose this. I choose you. Not because I owe you, but because when I imagine spring, imagine the cabin, imagine going back to that isolation, it doesn't feel like freedom anymore. It feels like loss. His eyes closed briefly, relief and something deeper flooding his expression. When he opened them again, the amber was bright with emotion I couldn't name but recognized all the same. I don't have a bond to offer you, he said quietly. That only happens with true mates, and those are rare. But I can give you my loyalty, my protection, my home. Everything I am and have, it's yours if you want it. I don't need a bond. I reached up, covering his hand with mine. I need exactly what you're offering. Someone who sees me, chooses me. Not because of what I am or what I can provide, but because of who I am. Then you have it. You have me. He leaned down slowly, giving me every chance to pull away. But I rose to meet him instead. The kiss was soft, careful, tender in a way that made my chest ache. His lips were warm despite the cold, and he tasted like pine and winter and promise. When we pulled apart, I was breathless, dizzy, more alive than I'd felt since before the rejection ceremony. Stay, he whispered against my forehead, not just through winter. Stay. Yes, I whispered back. Yes. Spring came eventually, as spring always does. The snow melted, revealing a world reborn, and I stood outside my cabin with Ronan beside me, looking at walls that had survived the winter intact. Good building, he said approvingly. Good timber, I countered, smiling. We'd come to check on it together, to make the repairs it needed, to ensure it remained mine even if I wasn't living in it, because that was important too, keeping this symbol of my survival. This proof that I could stand alone even if I chose not to. The compound had become home in ways I'd never expected. I worked full-time with Elle now, my skill growing daily. The pack treated me like I belonged, and not just because of Ronan. I'd earned their respect through work, through consistency, through simply showing up day after day and proving I wasn't going anywhere. Silver Ridge had sent one more delegation, more formal this time, less aggressive. Aaron had come again, his expression carefully neutral as he'd offered a formal apology for the border violation and extended an olive branch of peace. I'd watched from beside Ronan as they'd negotiated terms, established boundaries, agreed to mutual respect of territory. Aaron had looked at me once during those negotiations, and I'd seen the question in his eyes. Was I happy? Had I found what I'd needed? I'd smiled and taken Ronan's hand. And that had been answer enough. Now, standing in front of my cabin with spring sunshine warming my face, I felt the last piece of my old life settle into place. The rejection had broken me, yes. But in breaking, I'd been forced to rebuild myself into something stronger. Something better. "Ready to go back?" Ronan asked. I looked at the cabin one more time. My testament to survival, to stubborn courage, to the girl who'd built shelter with broken hands because she'd had no other choice. Then I looked at the man beside me, the lichen king who'd seen that girl and offered her timber, offered her safety, offered her a place where she could choose to stay, not because she had to, but because she wanted to. "Yes," I said, lacing my fingers through his. "Let's go home." We walked back through the thornwood together, through the forest that had once felt like exile, but now felt like passage between two places I loved. The compound rose before us, wolves moving through the clearing, smoke rising from chimneys, the sound of life and laughter and belonging. Tessa saw us first and waved enthusiastically. Ella stood outside the healer's quarters, probably organizing supplies again, but she smiled when she saw us approaching. Even Sienna, standing near the training grounds, gave me a nod that might have been approval. I'd come to the thornwood rejected and broken, with nothing but a knife and desperate hope. I'd built a cabin that couldn't have survived winter, and in trying to prove I could stand alone, I'd learned something better. Sometimes the strongest thing you can build isn't walls to keep the world out, but doors to let the right people in. Ronan squeezed my hand, and I squeezed back, and together we walked into the compound that had become our home, not because I needed rescuing, but because I'd chosen to stay. To build something real with someone who saw me, not as weak or broken or less than, but as exactly enough. The cabin would always be there, waiting in the woods, my proof of survival, my monument to stubbornness. But this compound, these wolves, this man beside me, this was living. And living, I'd learned, was so much better than just surviving.